Greetings and salutations. So this is going to be a test reading for the Prospector. It's a working title. I'm not too terribly convinced that that's going to be the title, but if some other grand title comes to mind, then I will use that. But for the time being, the Prospector is going to be the title. Bear in mind, this is a test reading. The final draft might have some alterations here and there might be some stops here and there as I'm reading this to change and alter things. I'm an obsessive chronic reviser. It just seems to be the thing that I do. So, on that note, how will this motion of time cast to the shadows of eternity, long for the ashes of pummeled bones, the devil and death in fraternity? Why is it these dearly devoted, in fits of frenzy, froth, and fury, upon granting the buried their long-lost due, bless this movement of swift history? Out of the future is the will of one, a singular force born from all, the will of God, wrought from everlasting nothing, furthermore, formed from the fall. There wasn't much left of the robot, a fragmented and fractured aluminum skin wrapped around a stainless steel core. The robot's alloy bones, with fittings and bushings at the joints to facilitate movement, was a relative copy of the human form only in that it had a head, torso, arms, and legs. The robot was trapped on a rock ledge, the cleaved mountain face looking over a cliff. The ledge itself was little more than a few square feet of stone, but a throne made grand by the magnificent setting, overlooking a swept valley of granite, sky, and evergreens. Tracing the valley crest along the peaks, knife points of earth and granite, the world was held between a cloudless deep blue sky or an atmosphere overwhelmed by storms, clouds, and bluster. The mountain peaks in the distance vanished under overcast, lightning illuminating raindrops as they shifted to snow between the plains and foothills just below. The machine gave little attention to the valley, the sky, the smell of pine in the air. What grand opportunity to see the world in the silence of its seasons, that eternal motion of time that turned mountains to dust by the force of wind and water and time. There was no such awe in the machine, preoccupied with climbing back up the rock wall it fell down from. The purpose of beauty in the human form, in the human mind, was a different purpose in the robot mind. It was a distraction from the program. They were numbers which did not compile into an objective sum. Objects in space were direct obstructions, or nothing at all. The robot wanted nothing, desired nothing, was driven by nothing. There was no biology to enforce upon it any compulsion other than the prosaic data within its mechanical drive. It was what granted the robot only one objective: returning to its work. There was a desk and a chair, an office with a window, and a responsibility, a duty to fulfill. A robot hadn't a need for a chair because it never expressed the exhaustion of discomfort, unless it was programmed to express such a thing. A robot had no need of a desk because a robot was sophisticated enough not to be encumbered by the trivialities of office furniture. The robot was compelled to fulfill the tasks the office intended it to do. Of course, an office possessed no intent, any more than a robot, as both were things without will. The endoskeletal micromotors clicked as the machine moved, strained by the abuse from the elements and by age. The robot reached over to a large stick and picked it up. It looked the stick over, placed it alongside its damaged leg, and then discarded the stick. The robot didn't throw the stick away, as it needed to pick the stick up again at the same time and check it against the side of the broken leg as it did before, but tomorrow. The robot put the stick in a different spot each time under the illusion that tomorrow it might appear to be a different stick, being in a different spot. The illusion was a simple pretense. The robot could not lie to itself. The stick was the same. The robot picked a rock up and placed it near a broken leg joint, then set the stone down in a different place than where it picked the stone up before. The robot pulled its damaged hand away from the stone, watching where one of its fingers refused to bend. There was some measure of neglect elsewhere on its body. Panels of aluminum were fuzzy with oxide where they met, stained pink from the rust that tinted stainless steel segments of the arms and the chest. Oxide flakes and gray dust, worse around the joints, turned green from where copper wire swelled underneath plastic skin. There was a moment the robot knew would soon arrive, an instance where one eye would fail, then another, sensors under the skin no longer responding to stimuli, as the wires and connectors were long since corroded. Where the rains and wind grind down the mountain, soon, too, the robot would be dust. The robot's head was beaten and battered. As much convention as was used in the design of a robot's face, there was no doubt the engineers had in mind to replicate human beings without direct copying. Hollow eye sockets for digital eyes, a pretense of a nasal cavity made into a temperature sensor, an intimation of mandibles, a fixed jaw, and the plastic implication of teeth to reassure the masses the robot was human-like, yet inhuman enough not to be personified as anything but a utility. And still, these robots were a thing of the past. As society grew accustomed to autonomous machines, the discomfort in dealing with these machines faded. The utility of the robot appeared more and more in following designs, becoming less and less human-like. The plastic teeth that did not smile stopped becoming teeth. A robot had no need of teeth, and so were eventually built without them. The scratches and dents on the robot's head were from the rocks and debris that fell on it, the bits and pieces from a cataclysm that sent the robot down the cliff. The remnants of the cataclysm remained. The patches of soil and rock the machine rested upon were stained with oxide from a section of rolled steel structural beam driven into the earth. The beam had struck the stone ledge with such force as to almost become part of the stone. Faded pine needles and pine cones scattered around the beam were tinted red and black. The beam had fallen down the cliff face before the robot. Had it been otherwise, the robot would certainly have suffered from the impact, other than the injuries from its own fall. Over time, more rocks and debris fell down the cliff, scattered around the robot after striking it. The machine endured the abuse from nature, its legs inoperable, one twisted off above the hip joint. After a decade, the rock under the piece of structural steel gave way, the beam falling into the abyss below. Years followed, with less and less of the ledge the robot rested upon remaining. How long had it been away from the office? The machine wasn't designed for existing in the elements. It endured the torments and tempests, no capacity of sensation to feel the pain, and no will to decry the futility of its circumstances. A human being would have been born, lived, and died in the span of time the machine had been away from its duties. How much would that human being accomplish in that span of time? Rather than lament its fate, the robot amused itself with the rocks and sticks, spending hours figuring ways it could make itself a new leg out of the detritus within reach and escape the mountain ledge. The very idea of escape was formed from the pragmatic push to return to its duties. The concept of impending doom, or the constraints of the ledge, the potential of falling into the abyss below, had no sway on the robot's mind. There was only returning to its duty, to the desk it did not require, to the papers it was set to compile. The robot wasn't a man, and couldn't be fired or demoted for failing in its duties. A robot was a thing. A human being was an animal, with teeth and feet and drives and desires meant only to be restrained to the point of neuroses. The robot and human could be similar. though it was easier to make a robot look like a man than a man look like a robot, unless for a costume made for a party. The robot had so many varieties specific to a purpose. In fact, a robot was closer to religious truth, as the robot could acknowledge its creator and interact directly with its creator, whereas a human being had only worship and hope and myth. Hope and myth meant nothing now, the robot so far away from the office, from its purpose. It was clear the world had come to an end and had spared the robot. Human beings would place hope on a reason for their having been spared, the will of God or the divinity of fate. The robot was secure that it survived because of a sequence of events. The big steel beam just within reach had fallen here before the robot, rather than afterward, where the impact would have sent the robot onward down into the valley. Those were the sequence of events, apart from the endless alternative events that might have unfolded. The ledge under the steel beam collapsed. The robot was transfixed, only in the moments it took to watch the beam disappear into the dark. It was another moment the robot was spared its eventual fall into the abyss.